Michael Scheuer headed the bin Laden shop at the CIA from 1996 to 99 and was also involved in other departments concerned with tracking bin Laden and Al-Qaeda right up until 2004. He's written several books on terrorism and Al-Qaeda. His most recent book, coming out in February, is Osama bin Laden, a biography. And Michael, we're so glad to have you here to talk about the threat from terrorism and Al-Qaeda.
Thank you, Mr. Bock. I'm glad to be here.
One of the things that you have stressed that hardly anyone does is that it's important to understand what bin Laden has said and written about what his grievances are, and almost nobody wants to do that. People just say, well, they hate us because we're free.
Yeah, one of the...
Go ahead and go through some of what you found.
A huge problem for us is that we have not taken the time to read what the enemy has said. During the Cold War, we read every word that was written by Marx or by Lenin or by Stalin or whatever a Soviet leader said, we followed very closely. There is over 1,000 pages of material directly from Osama bin Laden, and I'm not sure anyone has read it. And if Americans did read it, they would learn that Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, and now Mr. Obama have consistently misled them about what the war is about. In that 1,000 pages of material, there's nothing about they're hating us for our freedoms or our liberties, or because there's women in the workplace, or because you or I have a beer after work. It is very substantive issues, from our support for Israel to our presence on the Arab Peninsula, probably most damagingly for America, our support for tyrannies that govern most of the Muslim world. And so I think Americans are woefully misinformed about what this war is about.
I'm particularly interested in the support for tyrannies that govern the Muslim world. Now, the bin Laden family is extremely powerful and influential in Saudi Arabia, but Osama bin Laden seems to be disenchanted with the Saudi regime.
Yes, the bin Laden, you're right, the bin Laden family is the second wealthiest non-royal family in Saudi Arabia, the worth of over $20 billion in terms of their businesses. But bin Laden has turned on the Saudis, the Saudi government, because they are not, in his view, and in view of many Muslims, not Islamic enough. That they are debauched and degenerate and spendthrift and just taking the side of the United States or other non-Muslim powers rather than defending Muslims. And it's a very powerful argument throughout the Muslim world.
And yet the Saudis are subsidizing the spread of the Wahhabi version of Islam,
yes,
which is very close to
yes,
the Islamist.
It's a little difficult to understand, I think, for Americans because they don't have access to a lot of what is available. The government has not put into one repository what the enemy has said. The Saudis, Osama bin Laden is not an aberrant personality in the Saudi culture. He is the poster boy for their educational system. He is what they want their young people to be. But going beyond that, Osama bin Laden is basically, and his allies are defensive fighters. They believe that we have intruded into their world through our presence on the peninsula or Iraq or other places. And their fight is basically to evict us. The Saudi government and the Wahhabists in the Saudi establishment are imperialists. They believe that ultimately the entire Muslim world, or the entire world, has to become Muslim. Christians, Jews, Buddhists are going to have to either convert, accept a kind of secondary citizenship, or just be executed. And in many ways, the Saudi government is far more dangerous to the United States than Osama bin Laden, because they pay for a type of religious education among many sections of the American Muslim community that preaches pure hatred for Jews, for Christians, for democracy. If we're looking for the real opponents of how we live and how we think, it's not Osama bin Laden, it's the Saudi government. And they pay enormous amounts of money around the world to educate young Muslims with that kind of attitude.
And yet at the government-to-government level, Saudis and the United States are pretty close allies.
Well, certainly that's what American presidents want you to believe. When the Saudi king comes to Washington, you'll see the president of both parties, whether it's Mr. Bush or Mr. Obama, holding hands with the Saudi president as they walk through the Rose Garden at the White House. And yet, truth to be told, the growing problem of militancy among American Muslims, among European Muslims, among Muslims in Black Africa, is the direct result of the Saudis spending their profits from oil on inculcating a very anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish kind of Islam.
Do you think it would be useful to change American foreign policy so as to reduce our footprint in Muslim countries, especially the Arab Peninsula?
I think our foreign policy is a major motivation for at least Osama bin Laden and his allies. And again, I come back to the written word. If you read what they say, you cannot mistake their focus on the impact of U.S. foreign policy. Should we change it? If it's in our interest to change it, we absolutely should. Is there anything on the Arab Peninsula, for example, that's worth the life of a Marine except for oil? I think at some point we're going to have to begin to look at oil and energy not as a economic problem, but as a threat problem.
Thank you very much for your participation. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.